bracelets say, what would Brandy do? Right? Everybody in the company, what would Brandy do? Go above and beyond. Good job, Brandy.
Yeah. And go above and beyond, and just like listen to customers, let them talk, listen to them, and then, and then do something to help, resolve the situation as quickly as you can. And I think that's actually one of the reasons why GoShare has become a leader in our category, because we every single time we try to go above and beyond to make sure everyone has a good experience.
So you brought up another thing that I recommend a lot, and that is the customer interviews. It's the one thing that doesn't scale that I say you should do at any scale. I don't care if you're an early startup or if you're a Fortune 100 CEO. That is the thing that keeps you in touch, that keeps your finger on the pulse of what's going on with your customers, what's going on in your company, is doing those interviews on a regular basis. And it could be understanding, hey, how are we performing, or how are we delivering our service to you today? But it can also be understanding, well, what's next? Where are you evolving, and how can we evolve in order to meet your needs as things change? I think it's one of those things that, there's a certain scale where you start, set up a product team and you're doing customer research or market research, and they kind of own that. And the CEOs or the C-suite end up just getting some kind of distillation of that. They pull out the insights, maybe with a little bit of a highlight reel or clips, but there's no substitute for actually sitting down with a customer and having a real conversation and really listening to them.
Yeah, I totally agree. And for us, because, we're a two-sided marketplace, it's important to listen to the customers and the drivers, because they're both regular users and customers. And in fact, our drivers are technically members. They pay a membership fee to join GoShare, and we treat them like customers. And listening to them and seeing what's going well and what's not going well. How can we improve? Those are some simple questions that you can ask, and you'll get some really good direct feedback from the people who are using your platform, and it can help dictate the product strategy going forward, or the operational strategy, because it helps you uncover the areas where you need to improve in order to meet your customers' needs. So I enjoy doing that very much.
Yeah,
it's one of my favorite things to do.
Again, these are all reasons why you folks are successful, right? And
I think
this
so.
is sort of core to my coaching, and I coach founders of every different stage. And it sounds like you're hitting the mark, which again is a testament to your success. So I want to pivot a little bit and go back to what we were talking about before on fundraising. I think that is something that is very top of mind for every founder, any VC-backed founder at this stage, is how to raise money in this environment. So let's talk about that. What do you think what would be your principles or advice when it comes to developing that trust and getting investors to invest in, especially a first-time founder, but even folks who've had some degree of success, but not to the point where they can just pick up the phone and get millions of dollars at the drop of a hat?
Yeah. I wish it was that easy to just pick up the phone and get millions of dollars, but it's definitely not. I think GoShare's fundraising story is unique, and I'm sure every founder and every company has their own unique story as well. But there's a couple of tips that I can share. We haven't raised a tremendous amount of capital. We've raised about $8 million or so in venture capital. So not an insignificant amount, but not a crazy amount either. But some of our first investors actually found us through SEO. Like one of our key marketing strategies from day one has been search engine optimization. That's part of my background. I was doing that before I started the company, and we've used SEO to attract investors, drivers, customers, etc. So one of our first major angel investors found us through a Google search, and he contacted us, with a private equity consultant at his side to evaluate GoShare, and they were trying to determine, can we build this ourselves, or should we invest in someone who's already building it? And so they evaluated us and a couple of our competitors, and luckily they chose to invest in GoShare. But in order to do that, it was months of relationship building. I think they contacted us for the first time in like late November, early December, and it took about 6 months to close the first lead investor, and that was like a $1.2 million round, and the lead investor wrote a $750,000 check. And it took several meetings in person, over the phone, a lot of due diligence on their part before they were willing to write a check. And in order to convince him to do that, like, we had to convince the investor, his name is Claudio Burton, that investing in GoShare and our team was a better option for him to get a return than trying to build it himself. Mm-hmm. And that took a lot of effort. There was a lot of negotiating, a lot of back and forth. There was a few times where I thought the deal was going to die, but luckily, it didn't. We were able to negotiate, reasonable terms for everybody, and we were really happy to get him on board. And I guess my one of the pieces of advice that I can give to other founders when it comes to fundraising is your best bet is to not waste time with non-lead investors until you have a lead investor. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. In other words, like, let's just say you're trying to raise $1 million. Your lead investor probably needs to put in about $500,000 to kick things off. But if you're spending too much time talking to investors that can only invest $25K or $50K or $100K, you don't have much to talk about at first, because there's no terms, right? Mm-hmm. So you need to secure the lead investor. You need to have terms agreed upon, and then you could take that term sheet to follow-on investors and say, okay, here are the terms. Are you in or out? And I think in the earliest days, I was wasting time, like, doing lunches and coffee and, home visits and office visits for investors that were only going to invest $25,000 or $50,000. And it's not to say that you shouldn't meet with those investors. You should meet with them, but those meetings should be relatively brief. And, it's just you introducing the company and yourself and talking about, like, what your plans are for the future. But if you're sitting there trying to negotiate with them or work out some type of deal, you're just kind of spinning your wheels for nothing. And when we were finally able to close that first round, I think it's because I started focusing only on investors that I knew were able to lead the round and that could negotiate terms with us. And then after that was done, after we got that first check-in, then we went back to the other investors and said, okay, here's the deal. Are you in or out? And usually once you secure that lead, it's a lot easier for others to kind of jump on the bandwagon and kind of join you. And so I'd say, like, that was some good advice that I got early on. And I think it's good advice to share with other founders.
Yeah. So essentially what that is a delegation of trust. So the lead investor who has the most skin in the game or the most to lose is investing the most in the due diligence. Once they've done the due diligence and they've signed off and says, okay, I trust it, everyone else says, all right, well, I'm going to follow what they've done. And in fact, actually, so I'm an angel investor myself and a part of an angel group here in San Diego, which I'm sure you're familiar with, New Fund. And the strategy has actually been, we follow on investors, we follow on to rounds because the checks are so small, it's not worth it for us to do the due diligence. We can't justify paying an analyst and doing all of this due diligence for a $25,000 check. So I have to rely on other folks who have, bigger checks to rely on their due diligence. And that's essentially what's happened in Angel and certainly beyond that. So it makes total sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm familiar with New Fund, and it's, I think with before it was called New Fund, it was Tech Coast Angels, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we did get some investors out of Tech Coast Angels in the early days. Yeah.
Nice.
And I think angel investors should do some level of due diligence as well. Like, you shouldn't completely rely on the lead investor unless you've done other deals with them and their due diligence process is very sound. But we've had some angel investors who have done more nuanced and deeper due diligence on their own, which I think is which is smart, because then you can come up with your own opinion too before you put in your money. But to your point, you can only do so much due diligence when you're writing 25, 50, 100K checks. You certainly can't do deep due diligence on all the companies that apply to get funding through a group like New Fund. And so, it's a fair point. And I think a good point for founders to consider also, because New Fund can be great for filling out a round, but they're not going to lead the round. They're not going to do the due diligence. And so first focus on that. And then once you have the lead and the terms, then you go to New Fund and say, hey, we need an extra 250K. Can you guys put in some money? And that seems to be a good like cadence to go on for founders, so that they're not wasting, too much time with investors that they can't really negotiate with.
Exactly. Yeah. So, last question before we run out of time here. So now that you've overcome those kind of early growing pains, what are some of the scaling challenges that you're facing today?
Yeah. So today, the challenges have definitely evolved over time, and there's probably quite a few if I really dig deep, but like some of the surface level ones that I can think of offhand are, involve like balancing supply and demand in the marketplace. And so that is challenging because, first of all, a lot of our clients are retailers who they have peak season and non-peak season. And that can actually vary on a customer by customer basis. So some of them are really busy in the summer, some are really busy in the winter. And the reason that's a challenge for GoShare is because we need to have enough drivers available to meet the demand that's coming in at any given time all over the country. And so making sure that we can fill all the orders, or as many orders as we possibly can, is a real challenge. And that challenge is kind of exacerbated because we play in a very competitive industry. There are other people out there other than GoShare that can offer a comparable service. And so pricing is really important. There's also what are kind of known as like delivery orchestration platforms that allow our retail customers to compare in real time GoShare's prices versus competitors' prices. Oh, wow. And so we need to have a very like dynamic pricing strategy that we can deploy to make sure that, one, our prices are competitive enough that we get the order, but also that we're able to offer the drivers a competitive pay so that they will accept the order. And and coming up with that strategy and allowing enough margin for GoShare to make sure that we can keep our lights on and pay our bills, that's a real challenge. And so every single day we're analyzing the market pricing, like how are we doing compared to our competitors? Are we competitive enough? Are we paying our drivers enough to get them excited? That is a very real challenge that we face on a daily basis.
Yeah, very complicated. I mean, the two-sided marketplace, it's always been a real challenge for any founder that tries to enter it. What about challenges in terms of leadership, in terms of leading a large and ever-growing organization?
Yeah, I think first, going back to your earlier point about delegating, I think, again, as a CEO, you have to make a kind of conscious effort to manage your time really well. And because the needs of the business are always evolving, I have to be very conscious about how am I spending my time today? And do I need to be spending more time on sales, or more time on product, or more time on customer service, or more time on finance? And that evolves on a day-to-day basis. And so one of the things that I have to really get good at and continue to do is delegating, and making sure that, like, if a task pops up, unless I have to do it, like, I want to make sure that there's someone else on my team that's handed that task, someone who's capable of doing it. And so I think, as I grow as a leader, and as the team gets bigger, and we have about, 45 or 50 people on the team today, you really have to think about, okay, who can I delegate this task to? How do I take as much stuff off of my plate as possible so I could focus on the higher level business needs, as opposed to like getting in the weeds on a task that could be done by someone else. And so I'm still getting better at that.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. It's always a challenge, right? And as the company grows, right, what that looks like keeps evolving over time. So this is pretty central to my executive coaching work that I do, focusing on leverage, not only high value, but high leverage work, because, the CEO's time is the single most scarce resource in the company. More scarce than money, more scarce than anything, right? Because you can hire N number of other people in other roles, but the CEO's time it's only one. It is non-scalable. As much as you could work 24 hours a day, it wouldn't make a difference. And it's not about, so even if you're saying, well, I'm going to work on the highest value work that I could possibly do, again, as the company grows, the value that any one person can do actually diminishes in relation to other things. So it's really about the leverage of that work, meaning, does this work impact multiple people or multiple teams? Am I, again, modeling behavior or creating some sort of strategy or process that drives an organization, which is what leadership is at the end of the day, what it is.
Yeah.
Right. So what leadership is a high leverage activity that shapes and molds and directs a larger group of people. And so that value is greater than anything that I could do if it's creating a document or doing any sort of individual contributor type work. And that's the evolution from founder to executive, is to get out of this mindset that I have to do everything and I have to grind constantly and I have to, that no work is beneath me, that I'm going to roll up my sleeves and get my hands dirty, to no, I'm actually the scarcest resource in the company and I need to focus on leading and high leverage work and get out of the way, essentially.
Yeah. It's a great point about like finding the high leverage work and the high value stuff and trying to delegate everything else out. And one other challenge that I'll mention real quick before we hop off, that I just thought of that popped in my head is managing culture as the team grows. And also, so GoShare is now like a fully remote organization. Like it's pretty much just me in our office, and we occasionally have meetings here, but everyone else is basically working remotely. And that's a change from how it was pre-COVID, where we had most of our team, not all of our team. We always had some remote team members, but we had most of the team in San Diego in our office. It's easier to like affect culture when everyone's in the same room together, because you can see each other every day, you can meet, you could do fun activities afterwards, you can go. I was actually just looking back. I got a reminder today that 3 years ago or 4 years ago on this day, we were doing our holiday activity, and it was like go-kart racing, and, this year, like our holiday party is virtual, it's done online, and, and it's harder to affect culture when everybody is, remote and working from home, and it's a different culture. And so I think one of the challenges that we have as an organization is, how do you keep the culture and how do you keep people happy and motivated when they're in all over the country and in multiple countries? And we have people in like 5 or 6 different time zones. And so it's a real challenge to try to find, time and activities that you can kind of do, to kind of get the whole group together, to kind of build that, camaraderie and that culture, when you're distributed. So
I think we could do a whole episode just on that one question. And I know we're running out of time here, but have you found any signal or anything that works even a bit?
I mean, I think so. And I a couple things would be, one is open communication, right? So we use like Discord, and we use Google Workplace, or not Google Workplace, or Facebook's Workplace, I think it's called, to kind of make sure that the whole company can communicate openly and in real time with each other. And also for like announcements and things like that, important news, we use those channels, and I think that's helpful. And then, we try to get to the whole team together, at least in small groups occasionally, in person when we can. It's hard. We have a pretty big team in Brazil. We have some people in Europe, and our people in the United States are kind of spread out in, like 15 different states. And so we started doing like virtual events and virtual games, And I think that that's been fun. It could be something as basic as like, trivia or, some type of like game where you kind of get teams together and you're competing against each other for, some prizes and things like that. That's so far, like we found those to be like things that we can do, at a, reasonable cost that get the team together in one place and like interacting and having fun outside of like work.
Yeah, I will say I spent a lot of time doing Jackbox party pack games virtually all throughout COVID when everyone went remote, and we used to do happy hours and all these sorts of things. It was like Quiplash and those fun, trivia and word games.
Yeah. It's better than nothing, right?
Yeah.
It's not quite as good as having everybody in the same room at the same time, but it's something, right? It's something that gets people together, gives them a little competition, a little sense of teamwork and things like that. And I think those are all those little things kind of add up. But if you have other ideas and suggestions, I'd be more than happy to discuss those. And maybe, like you said, it's probably a whole other episode that you can dedicate to this.
Not to dive into it, but the one point that that I'll drive home before we wrap up. So there was a study on this when, about a year into COVID, and the study basically looked at how much time people were spending connecting in the workplace. And it was about 2.5 hours a day. It wasn't planned. It wasn't intentional. It was just meeting up at the break room, passing each other in the hallway, having lunch together, happy hours. If you think about if I'm spending an hour going out to lunch and I've got a 20-minute coffee break in the morning and in the afternoon, and maybe I'd go for a walk for a one-on-one or, chat for 10 minutes in between walking down the hallways. It was on average, came out about 2.5 hours a day. And so the big question that left on the table was, well, what are we doing now? That time that we were spending connecting just evaporated. So now we actually have to be intentional about it. And if you ask any executive, any leader out there, how much time are you intentionally creating? How much space are you creating for your team to connect with one another and form relationships and just chat about stuff other than work? I guarantee you it is nowhere near 2.5 hours a day. If even
probably
30
not.
minutes a day. Right.
Yeah.
So there's things that we can do to fill the time, but the first thing we got to do is make the time.
Yeah, it's a good point. I've noticed that our team does pretty well on places like Discord. I don't know if you're familiar with Discord. It's kind of like Slack, similar business model. It's mostly work talk in there, but there's personal talk and chats and jokes, and you could see people kind of like building a relationship on there and like personalities coming out, and it's done through like kind of more like GIFs and memes and stuff like that at this point. But it's I think generally
Gen Z native, right? They're growing up on Discord playing video games and stuff. It makes sense.
But at the very least, it's a channel for them to kind of communicate directly in real time, and I think that's really helpful. I don't know what we would do without those types of tools in place, because like email, doesn't really do it. We also do a lot of like Google Meets and Zooms like that, and I think those kind of help too. So you can kind of see people and talk to them. But it's really hard to replicate those water cooler meetings and those coffee break meetings and those lunch meetings and things like that. And when you're remote, when you're virtual, there's only so much you can do. But I also think, to be honest, there is some of that was wasted time too, right? So like I can think of like back in the day, like when we were all in the office and we were in a co-working space, at the time. And so not only would I bump into like our own employees at the coffee machine, but I would bump into friends from other companies there too. And sometimes that, hey, I'm just going to go grab a coffee real quick for a minute, turns into a 20 or 30-minute chat. Sometimes those were productive chats, and sometimes they were unproductive chats. And so,
but they still, they still serve a purpose of connection, right? And building bonds, even if it's just talking about the game or whatever it may be. There is some value there. And again, we're way on the other side of the pendulum right now. Well, I had such a pleasure talking to you. This went by really quickly, and I know that we're over time, and I want to let you go. But Shaun, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, and wish you the best of luck.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I appreciate you having me on here. It was really nice meeting you and nice talking to you. And yeah, since we're both in San Diego, we should definitely plan to meet up at some point and do the in real life thing, since we've been
Oh,
talking so
I
much
love
about
it.
that.
I would love to. Get me out of this box.
Yeah.
All right. Take care, man.
All right. You too, Eric.